Hello guys! Over the past week, I've been playing Mario Kart World non-stop, and although I've enjoyed exploring the game's world in free roam and getting incredibly stressed playing online knockout races, the single most impressive and memorable part of the game for me so far was when I played Rainbow Road for the first time. And if you've played the track yourself, I think you'll know why. Between the build-up of driving to this crazy-looking warp cannon from Peach Stadium, to the reveal of the track and its hilarious minimap, to the surprise appearance of a water section and then an entire space station, it's clear that Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road is all about dazzling the player with something cool and then one-upping itself over and over again. So, with my experience as a Mario Kart 8 Deluxe custom track creator, and as someone who loves learning how games work behind the scenes in general, today I want to talk about how this track is put together structurally, and how it manages to repeatedly surprise the player using some simple game development techniques. Okay, so let's start by quickly going over the track's structure. After the crazy looking skybeam cannon thing, the track's first lap is basically typical Rainbow Road stuff. There's a few turns, a few jumps, and then 3 twisty turny sections that would have felt at home in Mario Kart 8. This big U-turn part applies a temporary boost effect to the drivers, which is also used on the water section of Starview Peak and the second half of Bowser's Castle, and we'll be seeing a lot more of this gimmick later on in this track as well. Speaking of which, lap 2 starts with the surprise reveal of this extremely cool looking crystally floating island, which seems to basically be an excuse to allow the track to feature a water section, and which also once again applies the boost effect. This part of the track feels so open, with these additional paths you can't drive on, including this bridge, that I wonder if this was at one point meant to be an area you could explore during free roam. Maybe that'll be added in an update or something. Lap 2 finishes off with another twisty turny section with a split path that also continues to apply a boost effect to the drivers. But that's not the only effect that's applied here, because this section also features anti-gravity. And no, I don't mean in the way that loads of Mario Kart World tracks, and even earlier parts of this track, feature sections that would have been anti-gravity had they been in Mario Kart 8. I mean an actual proper rotation of the direction gravity is applied to the drivers. On these other fake anti-gravity sections, the camera will always try to sort of stay level with the ground, at least a bit, especially during snapshot mode where the camera doesn't rotate to match the player's orientation at all. But in this section, and basically the rest of the track from here on out, the camera rotates along with the drivers, including during snapshot mode. You're actually driving almost completely vertically here, but because of the anti-grav, that's hard to notice in the moment. Whereas the road here features cooler blue and green hues, another split path section later on uses warmer colors, and then in the final section the road becomes fully rainbow again. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This here is also the first appearance of the magical floating train that will follow us throughout the rest of the track. Then it's time for lap 3, which comprises a space station satellite. And to me, the reveal of this part as you fly at tremendous speeds and the sky around you turns black was even more breathtaking when playing the track for the first time than the reveal of the floating island part earlier. After a long turn that once again splits into 2 paths, you end up driving down the main shaft of the satellite in a section that features a few thwomps and a bunch of sharp turns and jump ramps. This is also where that boost effect gets activated once again. So far, the track's use of anti-gravity has been subtle enough to where most players likely didn't even notice, but not only do this section's 2 separate paths take you upside down compared to the other route, but lap 4 starts with the view of the Earth from completely upside down, and it is only after another twisty set of rainbow shoelaces that you'll be right side up again. This is also where the train from the end of lap 2 comes back, and somewhere along the way it's picked up a bunch of characters and other recognizable elements from many of the game's previous tracks. Lap 4 and the track as a whole ends with a few more turns where the drivers receive that boost effect one last time, and the finish line is actually this floating star ring thing, which is pretty unique. Okay, so that was cool and all, but what is there for me to talk about from a game development perspective? There are just 4 straightforward sections. The Rainbow Road part, the floating island... wait a second, where is it? You know, the massive glowing floating island made of crystals and with other smaller floating islands around it. There are even some pretty close to the starting line, and yet it's nowhere to be seen when driving on the earlier part of the track. This is a part of what I would call the magic trick of Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road, because a first playthrough of the track relies so heavily on surprising the player with its many different sections that the developers seemingly decided to make it 100% certain that these parts couldn't be spoiled by paying attention to what's up ahead. From what I found, even using snapshot mode, it's impossible to see this water section coming before you're supposed to, mainly because the exact moment it spawns in is blocked by these clouds. There's nothing here at first, then once you drive up the ramp, there it is, a big ol' floating island out of nowhere. Now, if you're a game developer watching this, or someone like me who's just interested in game development techniques, you'll probably tell me this isn't a magic trick, cause you know exactly what's going on. And indeed, this is just a creative use of culling. Culling is a term for that thing in video games where elements the player can't see get unloaded to save on having to process any unnecessary data. And it's nothing new to Mario Kart. For example, almost every track in Mario Kart 8 makes use of culling to dynamically unload portions of the track that players can't possibly see when they're on another part of the track. My favorite example of this is on Mount Wario, where this earlier part of the track, when you're at the very top of the mountain, actually doesn't make geographical sense compared to the rest of the track, because this section is floating above the slopes that make up the later 2/3 of the track. But because the game uses culling to delete this part when you're driving through the cave section, it doesn't matter that you'd normally be able to see it from this other part of the track because it's no longer visible now. And this is exactly what happens on Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road as well. Only instead of a cave section, the game uses these clouds to seamlessly spawn in the floating water island without you being able to see it happening. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the primary reason why the track features so many clouds in the first place, because these help hide the transitions between each section that gets spawned in and deleted. Also, on a psychological level, so long as you don't have the track's exact structure memorized, the clouds all around you make it feel more plausible that a section like this is actually blocked from view, even though in reality the floating island appears right next to the starting line, so of course normally you should be able to see it here. Now, in the case of Mount Wario, that track is so ginormous and features so many different detailed environments that culling had to be used, not just to make sure the players couldn't see the start of the track floating above them, but because otherwise the poor old Wii U would lag due to the amount of polygons it would be forced to account for all at once. So it could be argued that, as opposed to being used specifically to preserve the track's many surprises, maybe the primary reason parts of Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road appear and disappear dynamically is just for the sake of optimization as well. However, compared to most tracks in the game, and especially the free roam environments, Rainbow Road is relatively empty. There's just no way this stuff features as many polygons as all of this. So I highly doubt that the Switch 2 would lag if it tried to process this entire track all at once, meaning at most, conserving processing power is the secondary purpose of dynamically culling the track's different sections. Anyways, even though these can be seen when looking back at the start of the track, the two sections that comprise Rainbow Road's last lap are deleted at the same time the floating island gets spawned in. This makes it to where you can never get a close look at the section until the final lap, because these two parts would actually be really close together if they were ever loaded at the same time. Also, the game tries to get away with something sneaky here, because by the time you reach the top of this anti-gravity section, the first part of the track, apart from the finish line, has also been completely unloaded. But the funny thing about that is that we didn't go through another cloud tunnel to get here, meaning, yeah, there we go, the game just unloads and reloads this section in plain sight so long as I look in the right direction. This is definitely one of the cases where culling isn't used to preserve any surprises or whatever, because we've already driven on this part of the track, so it probably does just get unloaded to make way for the space station part to get loaded in. Speaking of which, that thing is protected by another cloud tunnel. However, this time the loading zone wasn't lined up perfectly, since you can just barely see the tip of the satellite spawn in here. And yeah, in case it wasn't obvious, you can't see the space station from any earlier part of the track. Looking back from this glider section, although you can see the road you jumped from the whole way, by the time you reach the space station, basically the entire rest of the track has unloaded. If you look really closely, you can even see the exact moment it happens, because even though the road here doesn't disappear, the floating island behind it does. This means that at this point, there is almost no Rainbow Road in Rainbow Road, if you get what I mean. Even the upcoming section, for some reason, isn't displaying its rainbow colors currently. By the way, a very obvious relic of the fact that there used to be a road here is that the light the road casts onto the clouds is still there. So all these clouds normally aren't neon like this on their own. This light is cast onto the clouds from the Rainbow Road using light maps, and those don't get disabled when the road is unloaded. Okay, so the satellite part is followed up by these two pretty large twisty sections, but as we know now, the game unloads the entire Rainbow Road part of the track here. So at what point do these pieces of the puzzle emerge again? Well, as it turns out, that happens right here, in full view of the drivers so long as you've taken the right path and are looking up. This is by far the most blatant and, I think, funny example of this culling technique in action, but I should also emphasize that this is by no means actually a problem. Finding the seams in the path of the game like this isn't something I do to laugh at the developers, or I guess in this case to complain about the game's price. There are plenty of problems just like this that can be pointed out about my own work as well. I just think shedding light on this kind of stuff is entertaining and fascinating. So please don't get the wrong idea about what I'm trying to do here. Regardless, once you shoot back down to that part of the track, the whole thing is loaded all at once, except for, once again, the floating water island, and, weirdly, the big finish line ring. That thing seems to pop back into existence the moment you land on this road, which also perfectly blocks the view of it spawning, so I can't find a way of showing the finish line load in real time. However, what I can show is that a bit later on, after going through another cloud tunnel, this is where the space station unloads. This means that we've now come full circle. At this point only the end and the beginning of Rainbow Road are loaded, while the more crazy sections have been culled, which is exactly how it is when you start the track. So now we know the trick that allows Mario Kart World's version of Rainbow Road to repeatedly surprise the player with its increasingly outlandish sections. But of course, a large part of what is so impressive about the track isn't just its convoluted structure, but also its visuals. Like I talked about in last week's video, it makes sense that most of Mario Kart World's environments don't look that much better than some of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's tracks, since most of the Switch 2's additional processing power is likely being used to deal with the much more power-demanding nature of rendering an open world. But despite technically featuring that open world in the form of Planet Earth below you, in reality of course Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road is self-contained, meaning the developers could make much more liberal use of the Switch 2's processing power. So not only does this track feature this absolutely beautiful stained glass looking Rainbow Road material, but this is also probably the best looking water in the game. And man, there are just so many particles and swirly effects and whatnot all over the place. It's this stuff that truly breathes life into this track in a way that no prior Rainbow Road is able to match in my opinion. Even beyond the obvious examples like the rainbow chunks dripping off of parts of the track, there are loads of subtle cloud effects and other particulates in the air that add so much atmosphere to the world around you. The way the sky turns completely black as you're leaving the atmosphere on your way to the space station is also a really cool visual, and this simultaneously gets rid of the clouds that surround the skybox in other sections. This really adds to the way the game manages to perfectly capture the scale of the curvature of planet Earth, with how you can barely notice it during the lower down parts of the track, but while you're in outer space, it feels like you can see the entire planet all at once. Another cool thing to pay special attention to is the details on the ground below. Not only can you see Starview Peak and Bowser's Castle poking through the clouds, but basically the entire world map has been remade at this much lower quality scale. So tracks like Peach Stadium or Crown City are pretty obvious, but how about the dome of Dino Dino Jungle or the giant bridge? Interesting by the way that the big light beam cannon thing is gone when you're up on the track. It's also weird that they did bother to model Bowser's Castle, but forgot to include the massive cloud that hangs above it. And in general, it is super easy to nitpick about the quality of this entire miniature world that they've made here, though honestly this is impossible to see without zooming in like I'm doing now, so it's not actually a problem. You can also see DK Spaceport down on the ground, which is noteworthy because that track actually ties into Rainbow Road. Long before the game came out, some people theorized that maybe DK Spaceport would be the track from which you access Rainbow Road. It is quite literally a spaceport after all, and yeah, I was one of those people. Now, of course, that didn't end up being the case, but the space station in Rainbow Road does feature a rocket that's themed after the original Donkey Kong game and watch. So I suppose in-universe this thing came from DK Spaceport. In fact, there are Donkey Kong references all over the satellite. And speaking of references, over the past week I've seen a sentiment along the lines of Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road references every other Rainbow Road in the series quite a number of times. And this is actually also something I theorized before the game came out. So, for the final part of this video, why don't we do a lightning round of possible ways this track might feature references to previous Rainbow Roads. SNES Rainbow Road is pretty obviously the inspiration for this space station section, with the rainbow thwomps, the angular turns, and even the retro-looking jump ramps. I don't think the track references the original incarnation of N64 Rainbow Road, but this big slanted turn here does feel nearly identical to a section on the Mario Kart 8 remake of the track, and obviously the whole flying train thing was also first introduced there. As for GBA Rainbow Roads, I guess the track features clouds, and you can trick off of the edges, but that's about it. GCN Rainbow Road also isn't referenced overtly, though it was the first track to feature a world below the road, so I suppose you could count that. For DS Rainbow Road, I can't think of anything really. I guess it also sort of featured anti-gravity as a one-off, just like this track? I don't know. The cannon that takes you up to Rainbow Road in this game is pretty similar to the one towards the end of Mario Kart Wii's version. And I suppose you could say the track uses the same structure as Mario Kart 7's Rainbow Road, though actually these weird boost panel strips are also very similar to the ones on that track. Lastly, of course, the whole space station satellite thing is clearly a reference to Mario Kart 8's Rainbow Road. In fact, this and the SNES and N64 references are the only ones that I think are 100% intentional. Like, if you think about it hard enough, you can say every part of this track is a reference to something. This part, for example, is basically identical to this section in Sweet Sweet Canyon, and this part is also very similar to the end of Big Blue. But I don't think any of that was intentional, and it's far from what matters most about any given Mario Kart track. When it comes down to it, despite all of its surprising uses of simple game development techniques, dazzling visuals, and possible Easter eggs, what's really going to make a track fun in the long run is its design. And to be honest, I still can't quite tell whether I actually love to play on this track because of how it plays, or because of all those other superfluous elements. After all, it doesn't feature any obscure shortcuts or sections that are tricky to get through, and like, for example, I know this is a bit of a hot take, but although Mario Kart 8's remake of N64 Rainbow Road was really amazing to me the first dozen or so times I played it, after a few years, or now more like a decade, that excitement has worn off, and I've ended up finding the track not that fun to play on, and really quite boring most of the time, honestly. And I'm afraid that that same thing may one day happen for this Rainbow Road as well, but I guess that remains to be seen. For now, that's gonna do it for this video, guys. Sorry I didn't talk about the track's amazing music, or discuss every passenger on the flying train in depth, but this video is already getting too long as it is. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like or subscribing or leaving a comment or something like that. I also have a Discord server linked in the description, and if you want to watch my videos early, you can sign up for a YouTube channel membership. Thank you so much for watching, and bye bye!